Okay. Okay. Thank you all so much for being here for WLT on the Writing Life, channeling anxiety and depression into creativity with Heather Harper Ellett. Before we get started, I just want to say a quick note. This is a really special event this evening because with this presentation, we're launching WLT on the Writing Life, which is our newest free program for writers. And for the last year, we have offered programming on the craft and business of writing, I think, nearly every week, but we noticed that there were some things missing from our conversations. And at the end of the day, that all sort of boiled down to the fact that if we're not taking care of our minds and our bodies, we are not nurturing the things that breathe life into our work and that keep us going every day. And we found that just something that we should absolutely be talking about. And I am so excited to be launching this new program with Heather Harper Ellett, talking about channeling anxiety and depression into creativity. So without further ado, Heather Harper Ellett is a graduate of SMU and a licensed professional counselor in private practice. Her debut novel, Ain't Nobody Nobody, was named one of the best mysteries of the year by the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel and a best work of first fiction finalist by the Texas Institute of Letters. She lives in Dallas with her husband and son. Follow her writing life on Twitter and Instagram at Heather Ellett and learn more about her counseling practice at dallascounselor.com. Thank you so much, Heather, for being here. That's it for me, but please feel free to take it away.
Awesome. Well, thank you all so much for having me. And as you guys already know, I mean, Writers League of Texas just has incredible programming and I've made incredible friends here. So thank you so much. And give me just a moment to deal with technology. Hold on. So we're going to share screen. Wait, yeah, share screen first. We are going to do, is this correct? And then we will push play. All right. Does that look good on y'all's end? Okay, I can't hear anyone anymore. Okay, good, looks good. All right, we already did the intros. Thank you so much, Sam. So this is a goofy little meme. Yes, after listening to her owner drone on for hours, Ginger suddenly realized she was not cut out to be an emotional support dog after all. I love this meme, and actually I had probably about 10 friends send me some variation of this during the past year because, you know, it's been a year, y'all. It's been pretty intense. And a lot of them, you know, accompanied it with a message that said, you know, I don't know how you're counseling right now with just the world being really intense. And I just wanted to share that counseling was one of the most amazing and inspiring opportunities I could have had last year, because when you're watching video footage of someone, you know, punching someone in the face because they're asked to wear a mask, every day my job was to either write or to sit in front of people who are trying to make themselves better, trying to, you know, do work on themselves, because we all are. And so I was so grateful for that, and it gave me such hope in humanity. And so seeing all of you here tonight, I just want to honor that and thank you for, you know, doing the work. We're all trying to do the work. So thank you for being here. So tonight, before I do that, tonight I'm going to divide it into two parts. One, we're going to talk about my kind of unique framework for anxiety and depression. And then the second part is going to be those 5 tips and tricks kind of based on anecdotal evidence, my experience clinically, research, science, all sorts of stuff as to how we might kind of flip the switch on anxiety and depression and make it into a more productive, creative state. And so then my little warning sign was a bit of a disclaimer because, one, you know, anxiety and depression are very complex issues, and I've got a 45-minute class, and so I'm going to have to simplify a lot of things. I'm also going to be kind of conflating anxiety and depression, even though I know that they're very different states in a lot of ways. But please know, I've done a lot of work on this professionally. I've also dealt with it personally. And so I will be using humor also. So I hope we can, you know, just all embrace that and use grace that we're kind of exploring a very complex topic in a short amount of time. And then secondly, this is my friend Marcus, a text we exchanged this week when I told him, hey, you should come to my program, because we had actually met at Writers League of Texas Agents and Editors Conference. And the thing that I loved about this text is because he was, making a joke that, of course I had solved anxiety. And the thing that I laugh about with this is that, whenever I have been in a dark place personally and gone to things like this, sometimes I will use, I have used kind of the exercises and stuff, and maybe they didn't quite gel with me. And then, if you're in a dark place, you might say like, oh, it didn't work, man, I'm really broken. And so I want to kind of make a rule tonight that if none of this stuff works for you, please, it has nothing to do with you. It has nothing to do with your condition, whatever you're going through. There's all sorts of wonderful stuff out there that can help. So, all right. So, like I said, there's so many frameworks for exploring anxiety and depression. If you've been in this realm at all, you know that everyone has an answer, right? It could be that anxiety and depression is more of a behavioral issue, like a learned trait. It might be like repressed childhood issues and frustrations. It might be a biochemical issue. It might be an inflammation issue, something that has gotten a lot of press lately. Writers League of Texas, you're based in Austin, could be a chakra issue, especially if you're in Austin, you've probably heard that. And then lack of exercise, an existential issue. Another one that's been explored recently is from this incredible book called Breath, where he thinks that actually anxiety and panic might be the result of like weird carbon dioxide levels inside the body. So there's like all sorts of fascinating frameworks to explore this. However, tonight we are going to look at anxiety and depression as a maladaptive creative state. So what does that mean, Heather? All right, so first let's define creativity. And I do want to check chat just a little bit. All right, cool. So with creativity, what is it? So psychologists pretty much define it as an original idea, making connections where there are no obvious connections. And so if you wanted to do a scientific study on creativity, there are multiple things you could do, but one would be what they call the unusual uses test. So they give you something like a milk carton, a brick, a paperclip. How many unique things can you do or make out of this paperclip? Then let's say everyone in this call did that. We all got 10 minutes to do something with paperclip. And then if you had something that overlapped with someone else, you got 0 points. However, if you were the only person who came up with something super unusual to do with a paperclip like this, because I think that's absolutely brilliant, then you got a point. They call it a hit. And so then you would be marked as being more creative. You'd have a higher creativity score. Another way that we mark creativity would be, or study creativity, is basically by finishing a narrative. Like psychologists will put out there the premise of a story. They will ask a bunch of study participants to complete the story with the most unusual ending they can think of. Then a series of judges come out and they say, this was the most creative response. You get points for creativity. And so basically your ability to make the most unusual or original connections is how they define creativity. Side note, one of the studies that they did the unusual uses test on was about walking and creativity. And people who went on walks definitely got higher creativity scores after they walked, So if you're stuck, there's your first tip, go walk. All right, so you might already see where I am going with this a little bit. So people who are anxious and depressed typically are really good at making these creative jumps, making very original statements about how they are possibly uniquely in danger in the world, or how they are uniquely poorly adapted to the world. And so let's see if any of this makes sense to you. So let's say we are in a Zoom call. We've all had Zoom happy hours, maybe, or a Zoom meeting. Or, remember the days we were actually in person, and you see someone who kind of makes a weird face at you. Maybe you're in your conversation with them, maybe not. Someone makes a weird face at you. So an anxious thought pattern to that, a creative jump would be, oh no, I bet I offended this person. I should have never said that thing about guinea pigs. He probably lost a guinea pig as a child, and I probably triggered him with my guinea pig joke. I should leave. Where's the exit? But how am I going to leave without anyone noticing? You can't just leave a Zoom call, right? So that's more of an anxious creative jump. But let's say that same person does a weird face. What's a more depressive version of this? Oh, he raised his eyebrows. Oh God, he thinks I'm ugly. God, I am ugly. Who was I kidding? Buying new jeans. It doesn't matter. I'll die alone and nobody loves me. And, if any of us have dealt with this, we can kind of laugh a little bit, because looking at it outside of ourselves, like, those are really big jumps that you have to make just by someone making a weird face. And yet we do that all of the time. And so that's where I get this framework that anxiety and depression are inherently creative states, because you are making jumps all the time. Of course, it's a little more stuck, and it's definitely negative, thus maladaptive. But the good news is it is a creative state. There is energy there, and therefore it can be moved. Another example, of course, is, with COVID, like last March, when we were starting to learn so much about this, I don't know about y'all, but I could come up with every single way that this virus was traveling. How many of us were washing our spaghetti squash multiple times, convinced we could get COVID that way. And even now, a lot of us are trying to navigate, okay, what are the rules now that we're more vaccinated, all that good stuff. So we've got a lot of creativity whenever there is uncertainty. All right. So what is the benefit of this framework? Personally, I feel like it is incredibly empowering, because if you've ever tried to treat anxiety and depression, sometimes it can feel like you're trying to kill off a part of yourself. Anxiety becomes the enemy, depression becomes the enemy. And so we just engage in this battle. And a lot of times, especially with anxiety, it's kind of counterintuitive. The more you work on it, the more you get entrenched in this maladaptive creative pattern. So it can be very liberating to recognize that this is a product of a creative state. It just happens to be a more negative expression of that creative state. So I have explained this to all sorts of clients, people who are, actual creatives who are writing, some people who are more, business type people. And there's sometimes nuance here that is lost, because one time I was explaining this to a client and she said back to me, yeah, I'll just accept that, I'll always be anxious because I'm creative. And I'm like, no. There is way more nuance here. Your creativity is not dependent on your pain. If we can all say it together, your creativity does not require you to suffer. And let me explain a little bit more why. So my son, he's 8 years old. I got permission to tell you this terrible secret about him, but he's sometimes afraid of the dark. Very common in 8-year-olds. And in our household, we'll say something like, oh, look, there's your creative brain. It's going out of whack a little bit again. And so he's also an incredible artist, a really great musician, even at 8. He's always building Lego sculptures. He has one going right now in the refrigerator of all places, incredibly creative. However, we would never look at a child and say, the only way that you are able to be a creative artist, creative musician, is because you are also afraid of the dark. So just because something comes from the same origin, possibly, it does not mean that they are connected or dependent upon each other. That is super important. Does everyone feel like they get that? Does anyone have any questions about that? Okay. All right. I'm reading the comments a little bit. And yes, I love a good Brene Brown quote, our high priestess there. All right, great. All right. So what are some things that we can do to actually work with our this creative state? So if you were coming to me for therapy, then this is something that I'm automatically going to talk about because it gets a lot of press, and it's also one of the most simple and effective interventions that you can do. So affect labeling, which is basically kind of the origin of, well, not the origin of mindfulness. Mindfulness, originated in Buddhism, so it came first. But in psychology, we often call affect labeling the process of basically sitting with your thoughts, recognizing your thoughts, and then putting simple labels on them. So if we took just a moment right now, just take 30 seconds, and then notice what you're thinking. And so you might notice, I'm a little bored. This is a little awkward, sitting in the middle of a conversation and having to look at my thoughts. You might be in kind of a sad place, and you might say, I'm sad. So anyway, this entire act of just labeling our thoughts has some pretty exciting science behind it, because if you do that kind of practice in a more kind of nuanced mindfulness training, so you would do that in more of a meditative space, after just 8 weeks of doing this labeling practice, structural changes actually start to happen in the brain. We're not neuroscientists. I'm definitely not one, but I think this is pretty interesting. So the amygdala is the fight or flight part of the brainstem. They call it the reptilian part of the brain. And you can see that this is just someone who, on the left, someone who is just a control, who incredibly anxious, they were watching a very emotional movie apparently in this study. So that person then goes through about 8 weeks of this mindfulness training, and then they do the same kind of experiment again, and the amygdala literally starts to react less. It starts to downregulate. And one of the things that's really cool about this is that the amygdala, I don't know if it physically shrinks, but it gets less connectivity basically. And then the prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain that really dictates good decision making, you just kind of, you're more chill, we're going to execute well, you got to have that to be a writer. It literally creates more gray matter. It gets denser. And so just by labeling, you create structural changes. How amazing is that? All right. So how do we then flip the switch from this kind of maladaptive creative state into a positive creative state? Because we're already in a creative state. We just want to supercharge it and move it into positive. So just like we did at the beginning of this, observe your recurring thoughts for just a minute. Label them something simple. A lot of my clients who tend to have a little more OCD tend to be a little more analytical. They can really go to town with this one because they're like, well, it's not quite bored. Well, it's a little more, lethargic, be simple, just put it in a bucket. We don't want to get overly complex with this. But we want to then choose one of our recurring thoughts, because if you start watching your thoughts and you start noticing hey, that anxiety, that fear bucket or that fear label comes up a whole lot, I would really want you to use that one, because we usually don't have a ton of them. And I would like for you to make it into a character unique to your specific brand of boredom, anger, fear, etc. And then you're going to write a scene, a poem, maybe even a nonfiction piece. Well, I guess it would have to be fictionalized, but maybe someone who embodies this. And you're going to observe that, that embodied character. Because that is the whole point of this. We're basically creating a space from I am anger to I am watching anger. And by doing that, we then have a different relationship with it, and we have more of a moment in which to make possibly a different choice. And it kind of slows down the reactivity, and it definitely tamps down anxiety and those negative thoughts of depression. Does that make sense? Questions there? All right. Yeah, name it to tame it. Dee Dee knows what she's talking about. All right. Yeah, another one I've heard recently that I can't stop saying is, if you see it, you don't have to be it. All right. So this is another absolute favorite of mine, knowing your values. So what is this? So one of my absolute favorite books that everyone absolutely should read is The Upside of Stress by Kelly McGonigal. She is a health psychologist and she's a lecturer at Stanford. She also has this absolutely incredible TED Talk called How to Make Stress Your Friend. If you have anxiety at all, please go and watch this and share it with everyone you know. It's a life-changing viewpoint and kind of what we're talking about here. But basically in this book, The Upside of Stress, she talks about a study that took place in Stanford in the 1990s. And Stanford at the time was having an issue with first-year students who have a lot of high pressure because they're high-performing type students, starting to drop out, starting to have more mental health issues their first semesters of college. And so they did a pretty simple intervention. What they did was had students journal about their greatest values, things that they really prioritize, things that just meant a whole lot to them, and just journal about them every day and how they were living those values every day. So like if they were really engaged in, justice, for example, justice was a really important thing for them, then suddenly doing all of that political science homework was a little bit more of a blessing because it was feeding something that was so important to them. And just that reflection, it basically way fewer people ended up dropping out that second semester. Like the incident of flu went down. It's one of those studies where you're like, is this real? But they've been able to replicate this in a lot of different ways. These are just some examples of the studies, like GPAs boosted by reflecting upon your values, reduced doctor visits, improved mental health and confidence. They've also shown this with improving weight loss, stopping smoking, stopping any sort of addiction. And it's one thing that I will always talk with clients about who are trying to, like, for example, lose weight. I'm like, why do you want to lose weight? How does this connect with some value? Because if it's just like, I'm afraid of the health stuff, like, that's not always enough, but if it's like family super important to you and you want to go hiking with your grandkids, then suddenly there is a whole different relationship to eating better. All right, so here's a list of values that she puts in that book. And it's one that I often send to my clients and I reflect on a lot too. Clearly there are more values than this, but for our purposes tonight, we're going to choose like 2 of these. And I chose fun because, we need that more right now. And peace and nonviolence also need that more right now. And so the exercise that I would like for you to consider for flipping into the more positive creative state, writing a scene in which a character is forced to defend one of the values listed. So of course, this is a more creative writing exercise as opposed to just journaling about your values. But again, like kind of using that creativity to where you are now having to defend it in a fictional scenario, I think is incredibly powerful. And also, I think we can look at a lot of movies and great books where they basically do just this. I mean, so the example I came up with for fun is a group of second graders have to defend their fun from an angry principal. I mean, maybe it's not second graders, but literally, I feel like every middle grade school book is about this. We are defending our fun. All right. And then another one that's a little more serious, a woman who is committed to peace must prevent her family from being sucked into the lure of redemptive violence after trauma. So again, if these are some of your values, how can you somehow fictionalize it or put it into the nice little gem of a beautiful poem and defend that value fully? Again, I'm going to check comments to make sure we're good. All right. Oh, DDA. I'm working with children with anxiety and depression. You are doing God's work. We need you. All right. All right. So this is one that gets a little complex, or it can be a little harder to understand. So please interject with any sort of questions, but it's one that I really love. So using this whole idea of values being incredibly important to, our physical and mental health, kind of like what I did with this framework of anxiety and depression, if we can look at anxiety and depression as a creative state, then anxiety and depression are they're the dark manifestations of creativity. So if you had creativity on one side, then anxiety and depression might be a dark expression of that. Kind of like anyone who has ever studied like Carl Jung, he talks about shadow selves, that, you might have someone who has an incredible helper personality, but if you are too helper, if you go like, extra helper, then you're probably going to martyr yourself. I mean, moms, not to stereotype, are really good at this. Moms are really good at helping, and then they kind of burn themselves out and they go into, can go into martyrdom mode, which I think is why it's kind of a funny trope that people use in sitcoms a lot of times. So, and so like I just said, when our deepest values go out of balance or attacked, anxiety and depression can result. So if I have a brand new client call me, for example, and who says like, okay, well, I'm having to come to the therapy for the first time in my entire life because I just had a breakup, I can be very clear that relationships are probably going to be a really high like marker on their values. I mean, they're probably going to value that above all, or, one of the top ones. And so whenever I talk about this in writing class, I taught this concept whenever I was teaching a characterization class. What I typically did for the interest of high drama is to take one of the positive value states like helper, and in one scene have it go all the way to martyrdom, because I think that's interesting to see how in just one little, box of dialogue, basically we can move the switch. But since we are trying to move from a negative to a positive state, I would challenge you to do the opposite, which is we are going to, and I'll move to the slide in a second, we're going to take whatever negative expression of whatever state we're in, and we're going to write a fictional piece in which we are moving to the positive. And what that does is it gives our brain a model for moving into positivity. Because, I mean, if anyone has ever worked in the mental health field, I mean, half the battle is just imagining what it would be like if you weren't anxious or depressed anymore. Because so many of us have been that way for so long that you have to actually create a new neural network of envisioning what does it look like to be happy. I had a wonderful conversation with a client today who had done a ton of work on his anxiety over 2 years. And today we had to have the conversation like, wow, now you're feeling really great. What now? What does thriving look like? All right, so here we are back to our values. And so I use this like kind of old pixelated computer image to show like light to dark, because I thought it was kind of fun. So here are some values: fun, peacefulness, nurturing, discipline, trust, independence, leadership, acceptance. And then here's some examples of dark expressions of that. Fun, but extra fun, you might go into irresponsible. Peaceful, yes, we all want to be peaceful, but if you are turn into a doormat, you're moving more into inertness. This can also happen. I'm a mom. I've seen myself do this. Nurture goes into smothering. Discipline, rigidity. Trust, you can be an incredibly trusting person, but if that goes dark, then you're just, naive. Same with independence. We all want to be independent, but then something switches and we go into isolation. Leadership to dictatorship, acceptance to resignation. So then the exercise, kind of like I already said, write a scene or poem in which a character moves from the dark expression, moves from the dark side essentially into the light expression or the more positive manifestation of that same value. And these aren't the best examples, but an irresponsible recent grad finds fun in fully caring for a child. As I wrote that, I was thinking like, yeah, that's basically like what Knocked Up is about. Like he's basically learning that like you can have fun by being in a connected, somewhat healthy relationship. All right, let me stop there for a second and make sure we don't have any questions. Okay, everyone good? All right. So This is a technique that I got from my supervisor whenever I was doing my internship in Austin. And then I have seen it just pop up in different iterations in various places. I did a wonderful training under David Carbonell. He is an anxiety specialist in Chicago. I would highly recommend his books. But whenever we are stuck in a maladaptive creative state, do anything different, like absolutely anything. And what my supervisor Frank always did, if someone came in a really stuck place, he would basically make them do opposite day, kind of like George Costanza always, like, you know, he had that whole episode of like, I'll just do the opposite of whatever my instincts are. And it sounds kind of funny and it might sound like it's minimizing it, but it really is powerful. So what does that look like? It means you take a totally different way home. David Carbonell, for example, he would have people, when they were having a panic attack, write a silly song, kind of like one of those old-timey limericks about their panic attack, and so anything that can kind of use that creativity, like we talked about at the beginning, like combining disparate parts, because if we are stuck in that depressive or anxious feedback loop and it is incessant, doing anything at all to interrupt it will help jar us out. So let me check our time. Okay, good, we do have time for this. So what I would love for us to do, if you're a willing participant, we are going to take about 3 to 5 minutes and we are going to combine disparate parts. And so haiku typically is a peaceful kind of, snippet of life, but we are going to write a rage haiku. So, and it doesn't have to be, we don't have to get super hardcore about it. We don't have to talk about the state of the world because we're all enraged about the state of the world right now in some way. But, it could just be like that woman who cut in line at the grocery store today. Like, the sillier, the better. So let's take a moment and combine these disparate parts. I do hope someone will share a rage haiku, and I will be very clear that, like, we understand it's supposed to be traditionally 575, but, or wait, yeah, that's how that one is. But it's okay if we do a different form. Yay, Marcus. Thank you, Marcus. Oh, the lurid light they built outside my window. Can I sleep again? That's really good. Yeah, whenever I was living in Austin, it feels like it is endless construction. Ooh, endless construction. That should be one too. That's good. Thank you. Anyone else? All right. Well, we will move on, but if there are any brave souls who can share their rage haiku, yay, Lauren, thank you. Oh no, my dog ran away. All the kids ran after him. Today is my birthday. Oh my goodness. I don't know if it really is your birthday, but happy birthday. Oh, I'm loving these. Thank y'all so much. My child is awake for the 7th time tonight. Please go to bed, son. These are wonderful. Happy birthday, Lauren. Thank you for being here. I'm even more honored that you're here. Paige, that is absolutely wonderful. And I can, ooh, I am so livid. Brenda's so livid. Oh. All right. 2 dogs off the leash. My Jack always on his. Don't be such a jerk. Cosign on that one. Absolutely. We've had some dog bites in our neighborhood. The second shot day. No warning for the next day. My arm scarlet red. Love it. Love it. We need to post that one for sure. Oh, good. Brenda, I am so livid. Oh, I want to hear it so bad. All right, well, I will move on, but Brenda, I really want to see that hopefully at the end. You can put it in the Q&A. Oh no. All right. Well, let's see, am I right here? Okay, yeah. So here, I did not write these, by the way, because I was doing the presentation, but some that I found. Oh, mine enemy, I shall soon drink my whiskey from your hollowed skull. I really liked that one. And then this one just made me laugh because I have the sense of humor of a 10-year-old boy, apparently, but I don't like haikus. They are stupid and boring. Shit, I just made one, so. I like the meta version. I like anything that's got some sort of meta element to it. Oh, white SUV bolts from behind passes. These are dramatic. I love it. Oh, cuts across windshield. Ooh, I like. Thank you. All right. Where are we? Okay. And so this is one that I almost didn't even include because anytime I talk about self-compassion with friends, even anytime I talk about them with clients, they're like, oh God, self-compassion. Or we either roll our eyes at it or we do the thing where it's like, yeah, I know I need to be kinder to myself, but which is just a really nice way of distancing ourselves and saying like, I know I should, but I'm absolutely not going to. And Dee Dee, loving coronavirus, can kiss our big oh my gosh. Oh, look at Lee. That's beautiful, Lee. Thank you. All right, I'm closing chat for right now, and then I want to check them all out at the end. But I want to get this last point out. So there is a ton of research right now about self-compassion. And so if you can't bring yourself to be compassionate just because, you know, it's a nice thing to do, let some of the research convince you otherwise, that just by saying like, hey, I made a mistake and that's okay, I'm not a terrible person, my life is not going to end, you know, love, they're showing all sorts of stuff that like you will actually perform better athletically, like people who do that actually lose weight more effectively, instead of like, God, you were stupid for eating that cake, you know, it becomes like, oh wow, I really love my body, want to nurture my body, and so, you know, I'll eat grapes instead, that kind of thing. But overall, better physical and mental health. And so if you want to read more about this, Kristen Neff, I believe she's at University of Texas. She's kind of a pioneer about compassion studies, also Brene Brown. But how do we do that? Because whenever we screw up, it feels bad, right? So you guys are writers, I'm assuming, and and one of the ways to do that best is with narrative therapy. And narrative therapy is, you know, literally what it sounds, creating a narrative around, and you are reauthoring whatever it is that has happened. So the exercise is quite simply writing out a difficult or traumatic event from the most compassionate viewpoint possible. Yeah, so an example, a young college student who stumbles through a job interview rewrites the experience to honor her bravery for not giving up and cutting it short. And it sounds simple, but I mean, you guys know what it's like to shift perspective in a book, and just changing the point of view, changing the lens, what details you pick up on, it changes everything about the flavor of the narrative. And writing this out is an incredibly powerful experience for the brain. I had a client recently who was in a pretty terrible car wreck with a friend of his, and he wasn't really hurt, but his friend was. But, you know, he kind of was stumbling of like, what do I do? course in trauma, and then eventually kind of got his senses, and then got the friend help, like, you know, and did some pretty amazing Herculean type stuff to help his friend. And so whenever we were talking about the anxiety and the trauma that was coming up for him afterwards, like, you know, did I react fast enough? Did I do all of this? And also just, you know, the trauma of watching his friend almost die, because it was pretty serious. We had him write out, like, basically the story of him being a hero, you know, that he got his wits about him enough to figure out what to do, even if he wasn't as fast as what he wanted to be. And the idea of like calling this guy's parents, like, to tell them what had happened, all of these were incredibly brave acts. And just having him write it out, it rewrote the way that his brain was filing it away before it became a trauma that locked in and then, you know, possibly became phobic. Yes, and so those are my 5 tips. But the last one that I wanted to say, because I would be remiss not to say it in a room full of writers, is, so this is my, on the left, this is my actual physical office where, you know, I used to be before I was going virtual, but I'll be there again soon. And this is a picture. His name is Amari, and he has been photographed by Randall Ford, who's an animal photographer in Austin. And I thought it was absolutely wonderful. And I keep this in my office to remind me and to remind my clients that at the end of the day, we are all animals who think. We might be creative animals, but we are animals who think. And so, you know, writers aren't always known for taking the best care of themselves. It's like we've somehow glamorized drinking and drugs, and sometimes, you know, staying up all night, and in which, I mean, Lord, you know, look, I have my wine. We all have our thing that we do occasionally. But if you would not treat an animal, especially an animal you love, that way, then probably don't treat yourself that way. So please make sure you are exercising. Please make sure you're eating decently. And especially, yeah, writers, we often just sit in front of a computer all day, and then we look up and it's a long time later, and we're like, why am I so anxious? It's like, well, if you put an animal in a cage without moving their body for, you know, like 10 hours at a time, you know, you're going to have a lot of feces on your hands and a misbehaving animal. So just a reminder for you there. And yeah, so here's some resources. I also added the Book Cougars podcast to there because I really love the community that they offer, and that they are incredibly positive, because we need community right now. And also, I mentioned earlier, John Valeri, his wonderful YouTube channel called Central Booking, because I think like writers talking about stuff positively, again, creates good neuro models for ourselves. So that's what I have tonight. And please ask questions. What can I do for you?
Hello, Heather.
Hello.
Thank you so much for that wonderful presentation. So to everyone in the audience, if you have any questions, we'll be doing our Q&A now. And you can put them in the Q&A and we'll get to as many as possible. So Heather, if you want to, you can keep sharing your screen, or if you want to stop sharing, we can.
Yes, I would like to stop sharing.
So let's get started. We have one question so far, and I have a few of my own, so we can take up some time to give a moment to put their questions in the Q&A. But our first question is from Anonymous, and they're wondering what label might be most appropriate for imposter syndrome, or can it be its own character? Oh, I love that a lot. Yeah, I would say it could be its own character if they're truly embodying the syndrome and not the imposter itself, you know? So it's like someone who is experiencing imposter syndrome versus someone who's truly an imposter. But yeah, I think that's an appropriate label. It's like this, I think imposter syndrome, like the term, we kind of get caught up in the psychology of it. But if I were going to be a little more authentic about it, I might be like, that's me thinking I'm fake. You know, like I would just put that in the bucket called fake, you know, or not good enough. Because I mean, honestly, imposter syndrome really is just a fancier
iteration of not good enough. And that's one of the fun things about the labeling exercise. But I enjoy doing this, like, I do it myself. You start to recognize, like, oh, look, my brain just got really fancy of doing, the same old shit. It's like, okay, like, that's just another cute way of me saying not good enough. It's just wearing a better outfit today,
Yeah.
Does that make sense? Is that helpful?
It does. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Next question is from Amanda Bennett.
Oh, hi, Amanda.
What do you recommend for people who are experiencing a high level of depression, who feel locked in, unable to access any energy to attempt creative work?
Yes, I am so glad you brought this up, because that is one, let me give an unsatisfying answer, but I will share it. I think you do have to go into a place of self-compassion, because especially the past year, there have been a lot of writers who have been incredibly prolific, but we have all gone through this collective trauma, and I don't know if the depression is due to that or if it's something that's been more ongoing, but the inability to show compassion towards yourself, I do find, gets you more stuck over time. And a kind of a personal story, like in January, we lost one of our very close friends to COVID, and it was just an incredible shock and absolutely horrible. But I kind of made this like pact with myself. It's like, okay, I tend to be kind of type A, and like, I gotta write, I gotta hit this deadline. And I allowed myself like not to do that. She's like, all right, I'm gonna make this a time of grief, and I'm going to allow the compassion for whatever this grief looks like. And I sure definitely had my like low times, but then I was like, ironically, like more productive on the other side of it, because I felt like I had given myself that gift of self-compassion to just be there without doing anything. But I would also go back to the whole do anything different, that maybe this is not a season of life for creativity, but what is anything else that you would be willing to do, that you feel like you could possibly do? And I'm also happy to talk more about that offline if that is a totally unsatisfying answer.
Well, that was great. Thank you. Okay, next question is from Amelie Jewell. Any tip to get you out of the loop when you feel like you're stuck? Writing is causing you anxiety, but you also feel like you really need to write to feel happier.
Oh, yeah. Were you in my brain, like writing? Yeah, because this is one that I deal with also. Yeah, absolutely. So with that one of the things that I've seen work with clients, I've also experienced it myself, is changing. It's kind of a do anything different, but I know you need to write to, feel this kind of happiness, but you're stuck. I would change the tense of whatever you're writing, because it has a totally different feel. I would write it from a different point of view. I would change your genre, not your genre, but your form entirely. I don't know if anyone read Interior Chinatown by Charles Yu. It won the National Book Award, but he wrote this entire book about like, kind of the trauma of the Asian American experience. And he wrote it as a screenplay. And it's absolutely brilliant. And I think there was something about, combining those disparate parts that, he was able to do something really amazing out of, kind of the trauma of the experience. And I know personally that whenever I'm feeling really stuck, but that whole, I gotta write, if I just switch to like third person present, for whatever reason, it kicks something off in my brain and I'm able to skate through it a little bit more. I'm not saying it's pretty, it's probably terrible writing, but it's enough to jar me out to where I can at least get the words on the page, because that's all we really want to do at the end of the day.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, let's see. A few more questions. Tifo is wondering if they can see the list of values again, or if they can find it anywhere. And they said also, is there a version of the list that includes their dark sides as well?
That I have not found the dark side yet, because that is what I kind of challenge clients to do. So it's like, okay, we go through the values list, and then you have to be creative about like how that manifests for you. Because I had a client who, she decided she was very much a nurturer. Everything in her life absolutely pointed to nurturing. But then we saw that for her, that didn't go so much into martyrdom, but it went into smothering. you know, to where she didn't necessarily trust the people around her to take care of themselves. So that list I got from Kelly McGonigal's The Upside of Stress, that book. You can also get it off this PowerPoint, but I have a picture of that from the book that I could send. I don't know where we can do that, but
And this will also be on our YouTube. So if you go to our YouTube, you can always like pause the video and take a screenshot or something like that of the slides.
yeah. And if you want to email me, I will happily send you that exercise, because I just took a picture of the exercise. And one thing that I didn't mention in the presentation that I really meant to is that since they've done so many studies on just journaling about your values or getting in touch with your values, they have found that just journaling about your values for 10 minutes like has lasting effects for months. And we're not saying 10 minutes a day, just doing it once of like, how is my current life supporting my values? And like 7 months later, people are still experiencing these positive benefits. So mind blown.
Yeah. Wow, that's incredible. This has all been so amazing. So this will be our last question for the night. And Carol is wondering what the relationship between anxiety and depression is, and how are they related/tied?
That's a good question. And I think you're going to get a lot of answers about that depending on, you know, who you ask. The way that I typically look at it in my practice, and admittedly, I focus mainly on anxiety and panic attacks. But I usually look at anxiety as an excess of energy, and depression is more of a stuck, like lack of energy, kind of like the previous question was asking. I still think they're both creative states, but one is a more activated state and one is a more stuck state. I mean, of course, if you look at neuroimaging and stuff like that, they're going to have an absolutely different answer, because I think different parts of the brain are affected. However, you know, if you do get medication for anxiety and depression, you know, they're going to give you, they often use the same medication for both of them. Mm-hmm. And so I mean, in my practice, I typically see more people who are only depressed because they have been so anxious. And, you know, once you are constantly worrying about something over and over and over again, and you can't really break out of it, then you do kind of switch into a more depressive state, you know, because it's like you start feeling hopeless because you don't feel like you have power over that big explosive energy. So from my focus, that is more what I see.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Heather. That is it for tonight. But if you all enjoyed what Heather had to say tonight, she is teaching a class on finding your voice with us on Saturday, May 1st. And I know I'm going to be rewatching this video over and over again. So it will be on our YouTube channel, and you can just search for Writers League of Texas, and we're on there. But yeah, thank you so much, Heather, for this. This has been really amazing.
Well, thank you. And I love that y'all are, you know, taking care of your writers in all sorts of different ways. I saw that y'all are doing something like with yoga for writers. I mean, I love all this so much. So yeah, way to be holistic.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much.
All right, thank y'all. And thank you for the amazing haikus. I'm sorry I didn't get to see everyone's, but I love what I've seen. Y'all are good writers. Oh wait, cats don't have 9 lives. There's nothing I wouldn't give to make that phrase true. Oh, I love it. Oh, soon we will all hug again. I love it. Thank y'all so much.
Thank you.
Bye.